The blood pooled in the dirt the moment Clara Zimmerman watched her father take his last breath. But it was not the knife wound that killed him, as much as it was the debt he owed to men who did not believe in second chances. She was 14 years old in the spring of 1873, standing in the doorway of their small homestead outside Winnetka, California, when the blade meant for her father's throat slipped and carved a vicious line across her own face as she tried to intervene. The men scattered like crows after the deed was done, leaving her father dead, and Clara marked forever with a scar that ran from her left temple down across her cheek to her jaw, a permanent reminder of violence and loss. 4 years had passed since that terrible day, and Clara had learned to live with more than just the scar. She had learned to live with the way people looked at her, or rather, the way they tried not to look at her. The women in Winnetka would cross the street when they saw her coming, pulling their children close as if the scar were contagious. The men would stare for a moment too long before turning away, their faces twisted in something between pity and revulsion. She had grown used to the whispers that followed her through the general store, the way conversations would die when she entered a room, the sympathetic glances that somehow felt worse than outright disgust. At 18, Clara lived alone in the small house her father had built, surviving on the vegetables she grew in her garden and the occasional sewing work she could get from Mrs. Patterson, one of the few women in town who would still speak to her. The work was always delivered and picked up at the back door, of course. Mrs. Patterson had a reputation to maintain. The summer heat in Winnetka was oppressive in August of 1877, the kind of dry, relentless heat that made the air shimmer above the dusty roads and turned the surrounding hills the color of old parchment. Clara had walked into town that morning with a bundle of mended shirts for Mrs. Patterson, her wide-brimmed hat pulled low over her face, her eyes fixed on the ground ahead of her. She had learned long ago that it was easier this way, to make herself as invisible as possible, to pretend she did not notice the stares and the whispers. She was halfway down Main Street when she heard the commotion outside the saloon. A group of men had gathered, their voices raised in excitement, and Clara kept her head down as she tried to pass by unnoticed, but the crowd had spilled out into the street, blocking her path, and she found herself trapped at the edge of the circle. "That is quite a horse," someone said, and Clara glanced up despite herself. The animal in question was indeed remarkable. A stunning buckskin stallion with a black mane and tail, its coat gleaming like polished gold in the harsh sunlight. But it was not the horse that caught Clara's attention. It was the man holding the reins. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his days in the saddle. His hair was dark, almost black, and hung down past his collar, and his face was tanned and weathered from long hours in the sun. He wore the typical outfit of a working cowboy: leather chaps over worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a brown vest. A gun belt hung low on his hips, and his boots were scuffed and dusty from travel. "How much you want for him?" one of the men in the crowd called out. The cowboy shook his head, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "He is not for sale. I have had him since he was a colt, and I plan to keep him until one of us drops dead." "Everything's got a price," another man argued. "Not this." The cowboy's voice was firm but not unkind. He had a low, rumbling quality to his speech, the kind of voice that commanded attention without having to shout. Clara realized she was staring and quickly looked away, but not before the cowboy's eyes swept across the crowd and landed on her. She felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing, and her hand instinctively went to the left side of her face, her fingers trembling as they traced the familiar ridge of scar tissue. She turned and hurried down the street, her heart pounding in her chest, her cheeks burning with shame. Of course he had stared. Everyone stared. She should be used to it by now. She delivered the shirts to Mrs. Patterson's back door and collected her payment, then stopped at the general store to pick up the few supplies she could afford. The store was mercifully empty except for Mr. Henderson behind the counter, and he served her with the same polite but distant efficiency he always did, his eyes carefully avoiding the left side of her face. Clara was loading her purchases into her worn canvas bag when the door opened behind her and boots scraped against the wooden floor. She did not turn around, focusing instead on arranging the flour and sugar so they would not spill on the walk home. "Excuse me, miss," a deep voice said. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was the cowboy from the street. She turned slowly, keeping her head angled so her hat brim would hide the scar, and found him standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. "Yes?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I am looking for work," he said. "Ranch work, cattle driving, breaking horses, anything of that nature. I was wondering if you might know of anyone in the area who is hiring." Clara blinked in surprise. He was asking her for help, speaking to her as if she were a normal person, as if her face were not a thing to be avoided and whispered about. "I do not know much about the ranches," she managed. "I keep to myself mostly, but you might try the Rocking M about 5 miles east of town. I heard they were looking for hands a few weeks ago." "Much obliged." He nodded his thanks, and for a moment their eyes met, and Clara saw something in his gaze that she had not seen in a very long time. Not pity, not revulsion, just simple, human kindness. Then he was putting his hat back on and turning to leave, and Clara felt something twist in her chest, a strange sensation she could not quite name. "Wait," she called out before she could stop herself. He turned back, his eyebrows raised in question. Clara's mouth had gone dry. What was she doing? But the words kept coming anyway. "There's also the Bar T Ranch to the north. They are always needing help during the roundup season." The cowboy smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "Thank you, miss. That is very helpful." "You are welcome." Clara clutched her bag to her chest and hurried out of the store before she could do or say anything else foolish. She was halfway home, walking along the dusty road that led out of town toward her small homestead, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. She moved to the side of the road to let the rider pass, but instead, the buckskin stallion slowed to a walk beside her. "It is a hot day for walking," the cowboy said. "Can I offer you a ride?" Clara's first instinct was to refuse. She had learned long ago not to trust kindness from strangers, but her feet ached, and the afternoon sun was beating down mercilessly, and there was something about this man that felt different from the others in town. "I do not want to take you out of your way," she said carefully. "I am not in any particular hurry. Where are you headed?" "About 2 miles up this road, the old Zimmerman place." "Then climb on up. My name is Zachary Everett, by the way. Most folks call me Zach." Clara hesitated for another moment, then accepted the hand he offered and swung up behind him. The horse did not even flinch at the added weight. "I am Clara," she said quietly, "Clara Zimmerman." They rode in silence for a while, and Clara was acutely aware of how close she was to him, how she could feel the warmth of his back through his shirt, how the horse's gait made her sway slightly, forcing her to hold onto his waist to keep her balance. She kept her face turned away, the scarred side hidden from his view. "Have you lived here long?" Zach asked after a few minutes. "All my life. My father built our house when I was a baby." "And your family? Are they at home?" "It is just me now. My father died 4 years ago. My mother passed when I was very young." "I'm sorry to hear that." There was genuine sympathy in his voice, and Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away angrily. She had not cried about her father in years. She would not start now. "What brings you to Winnetka?" she asked, desperate to change the subject. "I have been working ranches up and down California for the past few years. Heard there might be opportunities in this area, so I thought I would check it out. I am hoping to save up enough money to buy some land of my own someday, start a small cattle operation." "That sounds like a good dream. What about you? What do you dream of?" The question caught Clara off guard. No one had asked her what she wanted, what she dreamed of, in longer than she could remember. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I dream of a life where people do not cross the street to avoid me." Zach was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why would people avoid you?" Clara laughed, a bitter sound. "You cannot be serious." "I am afraid I do not understand." She pulled her hand away from his waist and gestured to the left side of her face. Because of this. Because I am marked. Because I am a reminder of violence and bad luck. Zach brought the horse to a stop. They were still a half-mile from Clara's house, surrounded by empty golden hills dotted with scrub brush. He turned in the saddle to look at her properly for the first time. Clara wanted to look away, to hide, but something in his steady gaze held her still. She watched his eyes travel across her face, taking in the scar that had defined her life for the past 4 years. She waited for the familiar expressions. The flinch, the pity, the barely concealed disgust. Instead, Zach reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently touched her face. His fingers were calloused and rough from years of hard work, but his touch was impossibly gentle as he traced the line of the scar from her temple down to her jaw. "You are beautiful," he said simply. Clara's breath caught in her throat. For a moment she could not speak, could not think. No one had called her beautiful since before the scar. No one had looked at her the way Zach was looking at her now, with something that looked almost like wonder. "You do not have to say things like that," she whispered. "I know what I look like. I am not in the habit of saying things I do not mean." His hand was still on her face, his thumb now brushing gently across her cheekbone. "I see a woman who survived something terrible. I see strength and courage, and I see a face that I would very much like to look at for as long as you will let me." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks before she could stop them. She had spent 4 years building walls around her heart, convincing herself that she did not need anyone, that she was fine being alone. But with a few simple words and a gentle touch, this stranger had managed to crack those walls wide open. "I do not even know you," she said, but she did not pull away from his touch. "Then let me remedy that. Have dinner with me tonight. Let me get to know you properly." "I cannot go to the restaurant in town. People will stare." "Then I will come to your house, if you will have me. I am a decent cook. I can bring supplies and make us a meal." It was madness. She knew it was madness. She had met this man barely an hour ago, and now she was going to invite him into her home. But something in her chest felt light for the first time in years, and she found herself nodding before her rational mind could object. "All right," she said, "but I should warn you, I'm not used to company." "That makes 2 of us." Zach smiled and turned back around, urging the horse forward. "I'm used to sleeping under the stars and talking to my horse. This will be a nice change." They reached Clara's small homestead a few minutes later. It was a modest place. Just a simple wooden house with 2 rooms, a small barn that was mostly empty except for a few chickens, and a vegetable garden that Clara tended with fierce dedication. It was not much, but it was hers, and she had worked hard to keep it running after her father's death. Zach helped her down from the horse and looked around approvingly. "You have a nice place here. Your garden looks healthy." "Thank you. It is a lot of work, but it keeps me fed. I will head back into town and get supplies for dinner. What time would you like me to return?" "Around sunset?" Clara suggested. "That would give me time to tidy up and make the place presentable." "Do not go to any trouble on my account." Zach mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "I will see you in a few hours, Clara." He tipped his hat to her and rode off, leaving Clara standing in front of her house, her heart racing, her mind spinning with 1,000 different thoughts and feelings. What had just happened? Had she really just agreed to have dinner with a complete stranger? What was she thinking? But as she watched Zach disappear down the road, the setting sun turning the dust clouds kicked up by his horse into gold, she could not stop the smile that spread across her face. For the first time in 4 years, she felt something like hope. Clara spent the next few hours in a frenzy of activity. She swept the floors, dusted every surface, changed the linens on the table, and even picked wildflowers from the edge of her property to put in a jar. She changed out of her everyday dress into her one good dress, a simple blue cotton garment that her mother had made years ago. It was a bit faded now, but it was clean and pressed, and it brought out the color of her eyes. She was just finishing pinning up her hair when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leapt into her throat, and she had to take several deep breaths to calm herself before going to the door. Zach was dismounting from his horse, saddlebags bulging with supplies. He had cleaned up as well, she noticed. His face was freshly washed. His hair was slightly damp as if he had dunked his head in a water trough, and he had changed into a clean shirt. "Good evening," he said, that warm smile lighting up his face again. "I hope you are hungry. I may have bought too much food." "Come in," Clara said, stepping aside to let him pass. Zach carried the supplies into her small kitchen and began unpacking them. Clara watched in amazement as he pulled out fresh vegetables, a large cut of beef, potatoes, flour, and even a small jar of honey. "This must have cost a fortune," she protested. "I cannot let you spend so much money on me." "It is just food," Zach said with a shrug, "and I have been saving my wages for months. Let me do this." Clara did not know what to say, so she simply rolled up her sleeves and asked, "Well, what can I do to help?" They worked together in the small kitchen, and Clara was surprised by how comfortable it felt. Zach moved with the easy confidence of someone who was used to taking care of himself, but he was also attentive to her space, asking where things were kept and making sure he was not in her way. They talked while they cooked, trading stories about their lives. Zach told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to a fever when he was 16, about the years he had spent drifting from place to place, working whatever jobs he could find. He talked about the open range, about sleeping under a blanket of stars so thick it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across the sky, about the satisfaction of a hard day's work, and the simple pleasure of a good horse and an open trail. Clara found herself telling him things she had not told anyone in years, about her childhood, about the happy memories she had of her father before the gambling debts and the drinking had taken over, about her mother, who she barely remembered, but who lived on in the stories her father used to tell, about the loneliness of the past 4 years, the isolation that had become her entire world. "I used to go into town every week," she said, as she helped Zach prepare the vegetables. "I used to have friends, girls I would meet for tea, families that would invite us over for Sunday dinner. But after my father died, after I got this scar, everything changed. It was gradual at first. Invitations stopped coming. People started making excuses when I tried to visit. Within 6 months, I might as well have been invisible." "That must have been incredibly difficult," Zach said quietly. "The worst part is not the loneliness," Clara admitted. "It is the way they look at me when they do see me, like I am something broken or cursed, like my face is somehow offensive to them." Zach set down the knife he had been using and turned to face her fully. "Clara, I need you to understand something. There is nothing wrong with your face. Nothing broken or cursed about you. Those people who turned away from you, they are the ones with the problem, not you. That is easy for you to say. You do not have to live with people staring at you everywhere you go. You are right, I do not. But I have spent enough time on the road to know that people can be cruel and small-minded about the strangest things. I have seen men shunned because of the color of their skin, women judged because they dared to speak their minds, children mocked because they were different in some way. It says nothing about the worth of those people and everything about the narrow hearts of those doing the judging." Clara felt tears threatening again and blinked them back furiously. She had cried more in the past few hours than she had in years, and she was not sure how to feel about it. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." "I would like to," Zach said, "if you will let me." They finished preparing the meal in comfortable silence, and soon the small house was filled with the wonderful aroma of roasting meat and vegetables. Zach had even made biscuits from scratch, and they came out of the oven golden and perfect. They sat down to eat at Clara's small table, and she could not remember the last time she had shared a meal with another person. It felt strange and wonderful all at once. "This is delicious," she said after the first bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Necessity, mostly. When you spend months at a time on cattle drives, you learn to make do with whatever you have. I was fortunate to work with an old cook named Samuel who taught me a few tricks. He used to say that a man who cannot feed himself is at the mercy of the world, and he was not wrong." Well, I'm grateful for Samuel's lessons. This is the best meal I have had in years. They talked throughout dinner, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Zach told her about some of the places he had been, the strange and beautiful landscapes of California, the people he had met along the way. Clara talked about her garden, about the books she read to pass the long evenings, about her dreams of maybe one day having a real business, perhaps doing sewing and mending for a wider clientele. You could do that, Zach said encouragingly. You could take orders from nearby towns, not just Winnetka. Build up a reputation based on the quality of your work, not on what you look like. Maybe, Clara said, but the idea felt impossible, a dream too big for someone like her. After dinner, they moved outside to the small porch. The sun had set, and the sky was ablaze with stars. Zach had been right earlier. They were breathtaking out here, away from the lights of town. They sat side by side on the porch steps, the night air cooling after the heat of the day. Clara was acutely aware of how close Zach was sitting, their shoulders almost touching. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "I cannot remember the last time I felt so at ease with another person." "Thank you for giving me a chance," Zach replied. "When I saw you in town this morning, I felt drawn to you. I know that probably sounds strange." "It does not sound strange. It sounds impossible. No one has been drawn to me in years." Zach turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious in the starlight. "Clara, I need you to stop saying things like that. Stop defining yourself by other people's ignorance and fear." "It is hard not to when it has been my reality for so long." "Then let me show you a different reality." Zach reached out and took her hand, his rough fingers intertwining with hers. "Let me show you what I see when I look at you." Clara's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. "And what do you see?" "I see courage. I see someone who has survived something terrible and kept going. I see a woman who tends her garden and feeds her chickens and makes a life for herself despite everything working against her. I see beauty, not in spite of your scar, but including it, because it is part of your story, part of what makes you who you are." Clara could not stop the tears this time. They flowed freely down her cheeks, and she did not even try to wipe them away. Zach reached up with his free hand and gently caught them with his thumb. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I do not usually cry like this." "You have nothing to apologize for. Let it out. You have been holding it in for too long." So Clara did. She cried for the loneliness of the past 4 years, for the father she had lost, for the life she had imagined for herself that had been torn away. She cried for every person who had crossed the street to avoid her, for every whispered comment, for every pitying glance. And through it all, Zach sat beside her, holding her hand, offering her the comfort of his presence without trying to fix or change anything. When the tears finally subsided, Clara felt exhausted, but also strangely lighter, as if she had set down a burden she had been carrying for far too long. "I should probably go," Zach said reluctantly. "It is getting late, and I do not want to compromise your reputation." Clara almost laughed at that. "I do not have much of a reputation left to compromise. Still, I want to do this properly, court you the way you deserve to be courted." "Court me?" Clara's heart skipped a beat. "You want to court me?" "If you will have me. I know we just met, and I know I am just a drifting cowboy with nothing to my name but a horse and some saved wages. But I would very much like the opportunity to get to know you better, to see if this feeling I have is the start of something real." Clara stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You are serious?" "As serious as I have ever been about anything." "Yes," Clara said, the word coming out in a rush. "Yes, I would like that very much." Zach's smile was brilliant in the starlight. He stood and helped Clara to her feet, then brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "May I come by tomorrow?" he asked. "I'm going to ride out to those ranches you mentioned and see about work, but I could stop by in the evening if that would be all right." "I would like that." Zach retrieved his horse from where it had been grazing peacefully near the barn. He mounted up and looked down at Clara, his expression soft. "Good night, Clara. Thank you for a wonderful evening." "Good night, Zach. Ride safely." She watched him disappear into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading away. Then she went back inside, her mind whirling, her heart feeling fuller than it had in years. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness that Clara had not thought possible. Zach had gotten hired on at the Rocking M Ranch, working long days helping with the summer roundup and cattle branding. But every evening, without fail, he would ride the 5 miles from the ranch to Clara's homestead, often arriving just as the sun was setting. They fell into an easy routine. Sometimes Zach would arrive with supplies and they would cook dinner together. Other times Clara would have a meal ready, simple fare from her garden, but made special by his company. They would eat together talking about their days, and then sit on the porch as the stars came out, holding hands and dreaming about the future. On Sundays, Zach's day off, he would arrive in the morning and spend the entire day with Clara. He helped her with the heavy work around the homestead, repairing the barn roof that had been leaking, fixing the fence around the chicken coop, even helping her expand her garden. In the afternoons, they would sometimes ride together on his buckskin stallion, exploring the hills around Winnetka, finding hidden valleys and cool streams. Clara felt herself blossoming under Zach's attention. The constant fear and anxiety that had been her companion for 4 years began to fade, replaced by a growing confidence. Zach never treated her as if she were fragile or damaged. He asked her opinion on things, listened when she spoke, valued her thoughts and ideas. He made her feel seen in a way she had not felt since before her father's death. One Sunday afternoon in early September, they were sitting by a small creek about a mile from Clara's house. The water burbled over smooth rocks, and the cottonwood trees provided welcome shade from the still, hot sun. "I have been thinking," Zach said, trailing his fingers through the cool water. "The foreman at the Rocking M mentioned that they might have a permanent position opening up in a few months. The head wrangler is getting old and thinking about retiring. If I could get that job, it would mean steady work, better pay." "That sounds wonderful," Clara said. "It would mean I could start saving in earnest for that land I want. Maybe even start looking at properties in the area." He glanced at her, something uncertain in his expression. "That is, if you think you might want me to stick around long term." Clara's breath caught. They had been courting for almost a month now, but they had not talked explicitly about the future, about what this thing between them might become. "I would like that very much," she said quietly. "I cannot imagine you leaving now." Zach's expression cleared, relief evident on his face. He reached over and took her hand. "Good, because I cannot imagine leaving you either. Clara, I know it is probably too soon to say this, but I think I'm falling in love with you." Clara's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "It is not too soon. I think I'm falling in love with you too." Zach cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. Then he leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to, and kissed her. It was Clara's first kiss, and it was everything she had never let herself dream about. His lips were soft and warm, and the kiss was gentle, almost reverent. When they finally pulled apart, Clara was trembling. "Was that all right?" Zach asked softly. "It was perfect," Clara whispered. They kissed again, longer this time, and Clara felt as if her entire world had narrowed down to this moment, this man, this feeling of being cherished and wanted and loved. But as perfect as their private world was, Clara knew they could not hide forever. Eventually she would have to face Winnetka again, and the thought filled her with dread. The confrontation came sooner than she expected. In mid-September, Clara needed supplies that she could not put off buying any longer. She had been avoiding town as much as possible, not wanting to burst the bubble of happiness she had been living in. But she was completely out of flour and sugar, and her chickens needed feed. Zach had offered to go into town for her, but Clara had refused. She could not hide forever. And part of her wanted to walk into Winnetka with her head held high, wanted to show the town that she was still here, still surviving despite their rejection. It was a foolish pride, perhaps, but it got her into town on a Saturday morning, her small purse clutched in her hand. The general store was busy when she arrived, full of ranching families doing their weekly shopping. The moment Clara walked through the door, the chatter died down to whispers. She felt the familiar prickle of dozens of eyes on her and forced herself to keep her head up as she made her way to the counter. Mr. Henderson served her with his usual efficiency, but she could feel the weight of everyone's stares. She was just paying for her purchases when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, if it is not Clara Zimmerman. I heard you had been keeping company with that new cowboy from the Rocking M." Clara turned to find Martha Albright standing behind her, a superior smile on her perfectly unmarked face. Martha had been one of Clara's closest friends before the scar, but she had been one of the first to turn her back afterward. "Hello, Martha," Clara said evenly. "Is it true? Are you stepping out with that Everett fellow?" Martha's voice was loud enough to carry through the store, and Clara knew it was intentional. Martha had always enjoyed being the center of attention. "That is really none of your concern. I am just worried about you, Clara. I would hate to see you get hurt. Everyone knows that cowboys like him are not looking to settle down. They drift from place to place, breaking hearts wherever they go. And a man like that, well, he could have his pick of any woman. Why would he choose someone like you unless he was after something?" The words hit Clara like a physical blow. The old doubts came rushing back. Martha was right, was she not? Why would someone like Zach, handsome and charming and capable, want someone like her? Maybe he was just amusing himself. Maybe this was all some kind of cruel joke. "I do not know what you mean," Clara managed, but her voice shook. "Oh, Clara, you poor thing. You always were so naive. Men have needs, you know. And a woman living all alone like you, desperate for attention, well, I imagine you are an easy target. He is probably counting on you being so grateful for his interest that you will not ask questions about his intentions. That is enough, Martha." The voice came from behind Clara, and she spun around to find Zach standing in the doorway of the general store. He must have ridden into town looking for her. His face was set in hard lines, and his eyes were blazing with anger. "Mr. Everett," Martha said, her tone instantly changing to something sweet and simpering. "I was just having a friendly conversation with Clara." "That did not sound friendly to me. It sounded like you were making cruel assumptions about both Clara and myself." Zach moved through the store until he was standing beside Clara. He took her hand in his, the gesture clearly possessive and protective. "Let me make something very clear to you and everyone else in this store. I am courting Clara because she is an extraordinary woman. She is kind, intelligent, strong, and yes, beautiful. What I feel for her has nothing to do with desperation or taking advantage. I love her." The store had gone completely silent. Clara stared up at Zach, her heart pounding. He had said he was falling in love with her, but this was the first time he had said it so plainly, so publicly. "As for my intentions," Zach continued, his voice carrying through the room, "they are entirely honorable. I intend to marry her if she will have me, to build a life with her, to give her the love and respect she deserves. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." Martha's face had gone pale, then red. She opened her mouth to say something, then clearly thought better of it and hurried out of the store. The other customers slowly went back to their shopping, though Clara could feel their eyes still on her. Zach squeezed her hand gently. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Zach paid for his own supplies, then guided her out of the store. Once they were outside, away from the prying eyes, Clara finally found her voice. "You did not have to do that. You did not have to defend me like that. Yes, I did. I will not stand by and let people speak about you that way." Zach turned to face her fully. "Clara, I meant what I said in there, every word of it. I love you and I want to marry you. I was planning to ask you properly, maybe find a ring first, but I guess the cat is out of the bag now." "You really want to marry me?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "More than anything. I know we have not known each other that long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are it for me, Clara. You are the person I want to wake up next to every morning, the person I want to build a future with. So what do you say? Will you marry me?" Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of pure joy. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Zach let out a whoop of happiness and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around right there in the middle of Main Street. Clara laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in 4 years. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, not caring who might be watching, and Clara kissed him back with all the love and hope that was bursting from her heart. "Let's get out of here," Zach said when they finally broke apart. "Let's go somewhere we can be alone and celebrate properly." They rode back to Clara's homestead together, both of them grinning like fools. Once they arrived, Zach lifted Clara down from the horse and pulled her into his arms. "I cannot believe you are going to be my wife," he said, his voice full of wonder. "I cannot believe you want me to be," Clara replied. "Clara Everett, that has a nice ring to it." "It does," Clara agreed. And for the first time since the day her father died, since the day the knife had scarred her face forever, Clara felt like she had a future worth looking forward to. They spent the rest of the day making plans. Zach wanted to get married as soon as possible, but Clara insisted on waiting at least a few weeks. She wanted to make a new dress, wanted to plan a small ceremony. There would not be many guests, probably just a few people from the Rocking M Ranch, but she wanted it to be special. "Where will we live?" Clara asked as they sat on her porch that evening. "My house is small, but it is mine. Will you want to move somewhere else?" "We can stay here if you want," Zach said. "I have some money saved. We could add on a room or two, make it bigger. And once I get that wrangler position, we will have steady income. Eventually, I still want to buy land and start our own ranch, but we can take our time with that." "Our own ranch," Clara repeated, testing out the words. "I like the sound of that." "We could raise cattle, maybe some horses. You could have a bigger garden, perhaps sell vegetables at the market. We would build it together, make it ours." Clara leaned her head on Zach's shoulder, feeling a contentment she had never experienced before. "It sounds like a dream." "It is our dream now," Zach said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "and I intend to make it come true." The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Zach hired a carpenter from a neighboring town to add a bedroom to Clara's small house. The work went quickly, and soon the homestead looked more like a real family home. Clara worked on her dress in the evenings, carefully stitching together soft cream-colored fabric she had saved for years. She had always imagined making a wedding dress someday back before the scar, back when she still believed she might have a normal life. Now that dream was coming true, and she poured all her love and hope into every stitch. Word had spread through Winnetka about the engagement, and to Clara's surprise, some people had reached out with tentative congratulations. Mrs. Patterson had stopped by with a set of nice linens as a wedding gift. A few of the younger women from the ranches outside town had even invited Clara to a small gathering, wanting to get to know the woman who had captured the heart of the mysterious new cowboy. It was not a complete transformation. There were still plenty of people who whispered and stared, still plenty who clearly disapproved. But Clara found that with Zach by her side, those opinions mattered less and less. She was building a new life, and she refused to let other people's narrow-mindedness hold her back anymore. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in October, a beautiful autumn day when the heat had finally broken and the air was crisp and clear. They would be married in the small church in Winnetka, with a simple reception afterward at Clara's homestead. The night before the wedding, Clara stood in her new bedroom, looking at her reflection in the small mirror. The dress had turned out beautifully. The cream fabric complementing her skin tone, the simple design elegant and timeless. Her hair was pinned up, and for once she did not try to hide the scar. It was part of her story, and she was no longer ashamed of it. There was a knock on the door, and Clara turned to find Zach standing in the doorway. "You are not supposed to see me before the wedding," she said with a smile. "It is bad luck." "I do not believe in luck," Zach replied, stepping into the room. I believe in us." He crossed to her and took her hands in his. "Clara, I want you to know something. Tomorrow, when we stand up in that church and say our vows, I am going to promise to love you for the rest of my life. And I want you to know that I do not make that promise lightly. You are everything to me. You have brought light and joy into my life that I did not know was possible. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifting cowboy with nothing but a horse and a dream." "You are so much more than that," Clara said, tears threatening to spill over. "You saw me when no one else would. You made me believe in myself again. I love you, Zach. I cannot wait to be your wife." They stood together in the gathering darkness, holding each other, both of them silently marveling at how their lives had changed in such a short time. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. Clara woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. Several women from the neighboring ranches arrived mid-morning to help her get ready, chattering and laughing as they styled her hair and helped her into her dress. When Clara finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy, radiant even. The scar across her face just one part of a whole picture, rather than the defining feature it had been for so long. The church was small and simple, but someone had decorated it with wildflowers and ribbons. There were more people in attendance than Clara had expected, mostly ranch hands from the Rocking M and a few curious townsfolk. Martha Albright was notably absent, but Clara found she did not care. When the music started and Clara walked down the aisle, she only had eyes for Zach. He stood at the front of the church looking impossibly handsome in a borrowed suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with emotion as he watched her approach. The ceremony itself was simple. They exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through good times and bad, through whatever challenges life might throw at them. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed Clara with such tenderness that several women in the audience dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception at the homestead was a joyful affair. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was music and dancing. Clara found herself swept up in Zach's arms, spinning around the yard, laughing with pure happiness. As the sun began to set and the guests started to drift away, Clara and Zach stood on their porch, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Everett?" Zach asked, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "It feels like coming home," Clara replied, "like I have finally found where I belong." "You belong with me," Zach said, "always." That night, as they lay together in their new bedroom, Clara felt a peace and contentment she had never known. The past 4 years had been dark and lonely, full of pain and rejection, but they had led her here, to this moment, to this man who loved her completely and without reservation. "What are you thinking about?" Zach asked, his fingers gently tracing patterns on her arm. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am, how different my life could have been." "We are both lucky," Zach said. "Lucky that I happened to ride into Winnetka that day. Lucky that you were brave enough to give me a chance." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had not met?" "No," Zach said firmly. "Because we did meet. We found each other. And now we get to build a life together. That is all that matters." The months that followed their wedding were some of the happiest of Clara's life. True to his expectations, Zach was promoted to head wrangler at the Rocking M in November, which came with better pay and more responsibility. He worked long hours, but he always came home to Clara at the end of the day, and she treasured those evenings together. Clara had taken Zach's suggestion and started expanding her sewing business. She began taking orders from neighboring towns, building a reputation for quality work and fair prices. It turned out that when people did not have to see her face in person, they were much more willing to do business with her. The extra income was modest but steady, and it gave Clara a sense of purpose and pride. In December, Clara realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week, not wanting to say anything until she was sure, but when the symptoms persisted, she finally told Zach over dinner one evening, "I think I might be with child. she said quietly, watching his face for his reaction. Zach's fork clattered onto his plate. He stared at her for a moment, then his face broke into the biggest smile Clara had ever seen. He jumped up from the table, pulled her into his arms, and spun her around. "We are going to have a baby?" His voice was full of wonder. "I think so. It is still early, but all the signs are there." "Clara, this is the best news. This is perfect." Zach set her down gently, suddenly worried. "Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be resting?" Clara laughed at his immediate overprotectiveness. "I am fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But yes, I am happy too. I was worried you might think it was too soon." "Too soon? Clara, I want a whole house full of children with you. I want to build a family, a life. This is exactly what I wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued her sewing work through the winter and into early spring, though Zach insisted she not overdo it. He became even more protective as her belly grew, constantly worrying about her health and comfort. In April, Zach came home one evening with unexpected news. "The Rocking M is selling off some of their land," he said, barely able to contain his excitement. "There is a parcel about 10 miles west of here, good grazing land with a creek running through it. The boss is willing to give me a good price on it if I want to buy." "Can we afford it?" Clara asked. "Barely. We would have to use almost all our savings, and we would need to take out a loan for the rest, but Clara, it would be ours. We could start building our ranch, our future." Clara put her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick. "How many acres?" 200. Enough to run a small herd of cattle, maybe breed some horses down the line. There's even an old cabin on the property. It needs work, but it is livable. We could move there, fix it up, make it our home." Clara looked around their small house, the place that had been her sanctuary for so long. It would be hard to leave, but Zach was right. This was their chance to build something of their own, to create the life they had dreamed about. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's buy the land." Zach let out a whoop and kissed her soundly. "We are going to be ranchers, Clara. We are really going to do this." The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Zach negotiated the purchase of the land, and by early May they were the proud owners of 200 acres. They spent Zach's days off riding out to the property, making plans for improvements and repairs. The cabin was indeed in rough shape, but it had good bones. It was bigger than their current house, with 3 rooms and a large stone fireplace. Zach threw himself into making it habitable, spending every spare moment repairing the roof, fixing the windows, and reinforcing the floors. Clara, now heavily pregnant, helped as much as she could. She cleaned and scrubbed, sewed new curtains, and planned where they would put their furniture. It was hard work, but she loved every minute of it. This was theirs, built by their own hands, a testament to everything they had overcome to be together. They moved to the ranch in early June, just a few weeks before the baby was due. The house was not completely finished. There was still plenty of work to be done, but it was livable and clean, and Clara immediately felt at home. On a hot afternoon in late June, Clara felt the first labor pains. Zach had ridden into town that morning to pick up supplies, and she was alone at the ranch. She tried to remain calm, remembering what the midwife had told her about early labor, but as the pains intensified, she began to worry. By the time Zach returned, Clara was in serious labor. His face went white when he found her doubled over in pain, but he quickly composed himself. He had sent word to the midwife before leaving town, but she was attending another birth and might not make it in time. "It is all right," Zach said, his voice steady, even though Clara could see the fear in his eyes. "We can do this. I have helped birth plenty of calves and foals. The principle is the same." "I am not a cow," Clara gasped between contractions. "No, you are much more beautiful than a cow," Zach said, trying to make her smile. "Come on, let's get you to the bedroom." The next several hours were a blur of pain and fear and determination. Zach stayed by Clara's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. The midwife did eventually arrive, bustling in with her bag of supplies and taking charge of the situation. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the bedroom walls gold, Clara gave one final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, quickly wrapping the squalling infant in a clean blanket. A healthy, strong boy. Zach had tears streaming down his face as the midwife placed the baby in Clara's arms. She looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect features, his shock of dark hair, his little fists waving in the air, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He looks like you," Zach said, gently touching the baby's soft cheek. They named him Samuel, after the old cook who had taught Zach to take care of himself. Little Samuel proved to be a good baby, sleeping in reasonable stretches and eating well. Clara threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she had brought to everything else in her life. Zach was a devoted father, often walking the floor with Samuel in the middle of the night so Clara could rest, talking to the baby as if he could understand every word. Watching them together, Clara felt her heart might burst from happiness. The ranch slowly took shape over the next year. Zach used his wages from the Rocking M to buy a small herd of cattle, just 20 head to start with. He also purchased 2 mares with the intention of breeding horses, something he had always wanted to do. Clara's sewing business continued to thrive, and she was now getting orders from as far away as Sacramento. She worked while Samuel napped, her fingers flying over the fabric, creating beautiful, sturdy garments that people were willing to pay good money for. They worked hard, both of them putting in long hours to make the ranch successful, but they also made time for each other, for their little family. Sunday afternoons were sacred, time spent together doing nothing more important than being with each other. When Samuel was a year old, toddling around on unsteady legs and getting into everything, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. Zach was thrilled, though he worried about her health, remembering how difficult the first birth had been. "I am stronger now," Clara assured him, "and I know what to expect. It will be all right." Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born on a crisp October morning in 1879. The birth was easier this time, and Rose was a tiny, delicate thing with Clara's blue eyes and Zach's dark hair. Samuel was fascinated by his new baby sister, wanting to help with everything from changing nappies to feeding her. Clara watched her 2 children together and marveled at the family they had created. The ranch continued to grow. By 1880, they had expanded their herd to 50 head of cattle. Zach had also successfully bred the mares, and they now had 3 young horses in addition to the parents. Zach's reputation as a skilled horseman had spread, and people from neighboring ranches were starting to inquire about buying his horses. Clara's sewing business had grown so much that she had to start turning down work. She simply did not have enough hours in the day to care for 2 small children and keep up with all the orders. It was a good problem to have, but a problem nonetheless. One evening in the fall of 1880, as they sat on their porch watching Samuel and Rose play in the yard, Zach turned to Clara with a serious expression. "I have been thinking," he said. "We have done well these past few years, better than I ever dreamed, and I think it is time we made some changes." Clara felt a flutter of worry. "What kind of changes?" "I think I should quit the Rocking M, focus all my time and energy on our ranch. We are making enough from the cattle and horses now that we do not need my wages anymore. And I miss being here with you and the children. I miss not having to ride out before dawn and come home after dark." Clara's face broke into a smile. "I would love that. I hate watching you leave every morning, knowing I will not see you until evening. The children ask for you constantly." "Then it is settled. I will give notice tomorrow." Zach did exactly that, and by November he was working their ranch full-time. The change was remarkable. With Zach home all day, they were able to accomplish so much more. He built a larger barn, improved the fencing, and even dug a well closer to the house so Clara did not have to walk so far for water. The children thrived with their father around more. Zach taught Samuel to ride when he was just 3 years old, sitting the boy in front of him on the buckskin stallion and walking around the property. Rose was not yet old enough for horses, but she followed her father around like a shadow whenever he would let her. In the spring of 1881, Clara realized she was pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two. She was tired all the time, and her back ached constantly. Zach took over more of the household duties, caring for the children and cooking meals while Clara rested. Their third child, another boy they named Thomas, was born in November. He was a big baby, almost 9 pounds, and the birth left Clara exhausted and weak. For several weeks, she could barely get out of bed, and Zach had to do everything, caring for the newborn and the older children, managing the ranch, cooking and cleaning. Clara felt terrible watching him run himself ragged, but she simply did not have the strength. It took almost 2 months before she felt like herself again, and even then she tired more easily than she used to. "No more babies?" Zach said firmly one evening as they sat together, baby Thomas sleeping peacefully in Clara's arms. "I almost lost you with this one. I am not going through that again." "We have 3 beautiful children," Clara agreed. "That is more than enough. More than I ever thought I would have." She looked around their home, at the comfortable furniture they had accumulated, at the children's toys scattered across the floor, at the photographs on the walls, at Zach sitting beside her looking tired but content. This was her life now. She was a wife, a mother, a businesswoman, a rancher. She was loved and valued and respected. The scar across her face was still there, of course. It had not magically disappeared, but it had become just another part of her, no more defining than the color of her eyes or the shape of her nose. When she looked in the mirror now, she did not see a monster or a marked woman. She saw herself, whole and complete. As the years passed, the Everett Ranch became one of the most successful small operations in the area. Zach's horses were in high demand, known for their intelligence and good temperaments. The cattle herd had grown to over 100 head. Clara's sewing business had evolved into something different. She now designed and created custom quilts that sold for impressive prices to wealthy families in San Francisco. The children grew strong and healthy. Samuel, serious and hardworking like his father, showed a natural talent for working with horses. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to learn new things. Thomas was the baby, spoiled by his older siblings but also adored by them. On their 10th wedding anniversary in October of 1887, Zach and Clara stood on the porch of their ranch house watching the sun set over their land. Samuel was 13 now, Rose was 8, and Thomas was almost 6. They were good children, kind and respectful, and both Clara and Zach were fiercely proud of them. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Clara asked, leaning against Zach's solid warmth. "Best 10 years of my life," Zach replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Do you remember that day in the general store when I first asked you for advice about finding work? I remember thinking you were crazy for talking to me. I remember thinking you were the most interesting person I had seen in months. There was something about you, even then. Something that called to me." "You changed my life," Clara said softly. "You made me believe in myself again. You gave me everything I never thought I could have." "You gave me a home," Zach replied. "You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to put down roots. Before you, I was just drifting, looking for something I could not name. Then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. In the distance, they could hear the children laughing as they played some game in the barn. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked. "The open road? The freedom of going wherever you wanted?" "Not for a second," Zach said firmly. "This is where I belong. With you, with our children, on this land we built together. This is freedom, Clara, real freedom. The freedom to build a life worth living." Clara thought about the frightened, lonely girl she had been 10 years ago, the one who thought she would never know love or happiness, who believed her scar had marked her as unlovable. That girl would never have believed that she could end up here, in this place, with this family. "I love you," she said, turning to face Zach. "I will never stop being grateful that you rode into Winnetka that day." I love you too, Zach replied, cupping her scarred cheek with his rough, gentle hand. You are beautiful, Clara Everett. You always have been, and you always will be. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Clara kissed him back with all the love in her heart. As the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss all those years ago, Clara felt a deep, abiding contentment. Her life had not turned out the way she had once imagined. It had turned out better. She had a husband who loved her unconditionally, children who filled her days with joy and laughter, a home and a business and a place in the world. She had overcome the pain and rejection of her past to build a future brighter than she had ever dared to dream. The scar across her face would always be there, a permanent reminder of violence and loss, but it was also a reminder of survival, of strength, of the capacity to endure and overcome. It was part of her story, but it was not the whole story. The whole story was this: a girl who was shunned and alone, and a cowboy who saw past the scar to the woman beneath. A love that grew from kindness and respect into something deep and unbreakable. A family built on love and hard work and determination. A ranch carved out of the California wilderness through sweat and sacrifice and hope. It was a good story. It was her story. And as Clara stood on her porch with Zach's arm around her and her children's laughter filling the evening air, she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment of it. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Samuel grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over most of the horse breeding operation. At 19, he married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch, and they built a small house on the Everett property. Clara and Zach became grandparents in 1895, and Clara found that the joy of holding her granddaughter was almost as intense as holding her own children had been. Rose proved to have a talent for business, helping Clara expand her quilting operation and eventually traveling to San Francisco herself to meet with clients and negotiate contracts. She was fierce and independent, much like her mother, and Clara could not have been more proud of the woman she had become. Thomas, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by developing a passion for cattle ranching. He studied everything he could about breeding and raising cattle, and by the time he was 20, he was managing the herd and making decisions about which animals to breed and which to sell. Under his management, the cattle operation flourished. In the summer of 1897, now in their early 40s, Clara and Zach sat on their porch just as they had done countless times before. But this time, they were surrounded by their children and their children's families. Samuel and Emma had 3 children now. Rose had recently married a lawyer from San Francisco and was expecting her first child. Thomas was courting a girl from Winnetka, and Clara suspected an engagement was not far off. "We did all right," Zach said, watching their assembled family with satisfaction. "We did better than all right," Clara replied. "We built something real, something lasting." The ranch now covered 500 acres, having been expanded multiple times over the years. The Everett name was known and respected throughout California. They were successful ranchers, yes, but more importantly, they were a family. They had created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Clara thought about the town of Winnetka, about the people who had once shunned her. Over the years, many of them had come around. Some had apologized, admitting they had been wrong to judge her so harshly. Others simply started treating her with respect, acknowledging her success and the family she had built. A few, like Martha Albright, never changed, but Clara found she did not care. Those people no longer had any power over her. She had proven them all wrong. She had built a life worth living, not despite her scar, but simply alongside it. She had loved and been loved in return. She had raised children and built a business and carved out a place for herself in the world. As the sun set on another beautiful California evening, Clara looked at Zach, at the man who had changed her life with a simple touch and 3 simple words: "You are beautiful." He was older now, his dark hair streaked with gray, his face more weathered and lined, but to Clara he was just as handsome as he had been that first day in Winnetka. What are you thinking about? Zach asked, catching her staring. I am thinking about how lucky I am, how blessed I have been. We have both been blessed, Zach said, taking her hand. Every single day with you has been a gift. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the evening breeze. Their children were happy and successful. Their ranch was thriving. They had built exactly the life they had dreamed of all those years ago, sitting on a different porch, planning their future. Clara traced the scar on her face with her finger, a gesture she had not made in years. It was still there, still visible, still part of her. But it no longer defined her. She was so much more than that mark. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a businesswoman, a rancher. She was loved and valued and respected. I would not change anything, she said suddenly. If I could go back and prevent the scar, prevent my father's death, change any of it, I would not, because it all led me here, to you, to this life. Zach squeezed her hand. I feel the same way. Every hardship, every difficulty, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it to end up here with you. They sat together as the stars began to appear. The same stars that had witnessed their entire journey together. The stars that had seen a lonely woman and a drifting cowboy find each other against all odds. The stars that had watched them fall in love, build a home, raise a family, create a legacy. Clara Everett, once Clara Zimmerman, the girl who had been shunned and pitied, the woman with the scar across her face, leaned her head on her husband's shoulder and smiled. She had everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to hope for. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The story of Clara and Zach became something of a legend in Winnetka and the surrounding areas. People told it to their children and grandchildren, the tale of the cowboy who saw beauty where others saw only a flaw. The story of love that overcame judgment and prejudice. It became a reminder that true worth is not found in perfection, but in character, that love can heal the deepest wounds, and that the marks life leaves on us, whether visible or invisible, are part of what makes us who we are. Years later, when Clara and Zach had both passed on peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch to remember them. They told stories, laughed and cried, and celebrated 2 lives well lived. And on the mantel in the ranch house, pride of place, sat a photograph taken on Clara and Zach's 50th wedding anniversary. In it, they stood side by side, his arm around her waist, both of them looking at each other with love so clear it radiated from the image. Clara's scar was visible in the photograph, running across her left cheek, but so was her smile, bright and genuine and utterly beautiful. Beneath the photograph, engraved on a small plaque, were the words Zach had spoken to her that very first day in the general store in Winnetka, the words that had changed her life forever. You are beautiful. And she was. She truly was.